Thank you for that. Good morning, everyone. Thank you for coming. Thank you to Councillor Sutton for presenting and also Nisha for being here to answer any difficult questions that people might have. Can we start off with item 1 then, apologies?
Thank you, Chair. We have apologies from Mrs Podesi, from Mr Snape and Mr Wildman. Mrs Edgeler will be a little late, but she is attending.
Thank you. Are there any declarations of interest? No. Our people have had the opportunity to read the minutes of the meeting held on the 27th of July. Are we happy that I sign them as a true and accurate record? Thank you. Thank you very much. Straight into item 4 then. I just wondered, obviously everyone's seen the 2 presentations that were in the pack and read through them, and there does seem to be quite a lot of crossover with the 2 presentations. I just wondered whether it's easier to keep them separate or maybe try to consider them both together. What would be easier for you?
I think you're right, Chairman. There will be some crossover, but they are 2 distinctive things. So if we could try and keep them together, if we could try and keep them separate, I think that would be helpful. I think members will probably get a little bit more out of it if we do try and do that.
First one then, if we could, impact of cabinet investment in children's services. Over to you.
Okay, thank you very much for that. As I said, two papers this morning. This one, the impact of the investment in whole of children's services, and it does include the area around SEND as well. And the second paper is more about what we're doing around children in care. So we will endeavour to keep them separate. Colleagues will recall that the investment in the service that we've bought before the committee previously and gone through that in a little bit of detail. We are now probably coming very much to the end of that investment, all being put in, all those roles and areas that we were going to upgrade, all being completed. So what I will ask, and I know members will have looked through it. I'll ask Nisha if you can just pick up on a few highlights for about 5 minutes, if that's okay, Mr. Chairman, just to go through it a little bit, to give members a little bit of a flavour.
That would be really helpful. Thank you. Over to you, Nisha.
Thank you. I'll try and keep to that 5 minutes, but no promises. So, this slide looks like a busy slide, but we thought it will be useful to have a breakdown. It will be useful to have a breakdown for members to see exactly where the spend is and how far further we have moved with materializing that investment. This slide shows a bit of a timeline of all the recruitment activity that has taken place since the investment was agreed within children's. So where I want us to kind of focus a little bit on is where we are now, is we are moving as per the plan. So all the existing posts were recruited to pretty swiftly for people to start from this financial year. So we finished their onboarding by July this year. However, for the new posts, because for social work, stabilizing the social work staff, there was an additional challenge. It wasn't just uplifting the salaries where people were currently, but we were trying to address 2 problems there. One was having enough staff to manage the workloads, but 2 was having a longer term solution for keeping Staffordshire as an authority of choice to establish the progression mechanism so that we grow our own, but able to keep our own as well. So in order to get a progression process, we had to engage with staff initially in the consultation to design what the progression should look like, which meets our needs within children's of training, development, progression, and retaining our talent within Staffordshire for a longer period of time. So we are coming to that final stages. It's gone to the trade unions. We are now in formal consultation, which ends this week. We have had a very positive response, probably because it was done very restoratively to begin with, which was the Q4 of last year and a part of Q1 of this financial year. And we will start recruiting to those posts from October this year. Now that recruitment activity, I'm confident, will be very swift because we've got people-level data sitting behind that progression plan. So we know which are our existing grade 9s which are ready to move into grade 10s. We know which are our existing grade 10s ready to move to grade 11s and how much we need to go externally to recruit. The conversations with our existing agency staff where we can convert them, where we want to keep them, and we can convert them to permanent staff, thereby reducing those agency overspends. So all that planning, so that it feels like it's a bit delayed, but it took a lot of planning to make sure we retain our talent within Staffordshire and we show our commitment to growing our own and investing in our own. So we are at a very exciting stage around social work recruitment. Another thing that I do want to point out is you might see, yes, we agreed an investment into our residential staff because last financial year, children in care spend was quite high, well it has been, and our residential provision was seen as a particular challenge because of legal reasons, because we were forced by judiciary to have children in our provision on a solo basis, but we also struggled to recruit, and therefore we wanted to have an investment so that we could be competitive in the market around residential provision. However, since that time, we have done a further deep dive with the change of leadership in that part of the service. We need to future-proof our residential because the complexity in society is increasing and we are seeing the complexity of need of children. So in order to keep ourselves competitive in the market, in order to make sure we future-proof in line with our sufficiency strategy, we decided to plan well now, relook at our provision and our modelling, and then use those funds more effectively to future-proof long-term. So that's the delay over there, but we are being sensible. We think we are being sensible about it. And we will be bringing some business cases to members later in the year for consideration of the future planning and future-proofing. Looking at the impact of investment, I think it has been immense. I do want to say, the investment puts Staffordshire in a very different kind of a league with Ofsted and DFE because we've had those visits, we've shared our plans, our aspirations, and the support of our political leadership for our plans for children's, and that is reflected in Staffordshire being chosen for 2 DFE pilots already. We have got 2 further bids which are going through. We know about the DFE support we've had for the progress we've made around our APP for SEND. The staff stability and morale, I mean, from where staff were in 2021 when I joined Staffordshire post-transformation to where we are now, it's absolutely a different place. People are more positive, more solution-focused, they see the future. So that impact, and that is, I'll show, you would have seen the ENPS slides, the response from those surveys reflects that positivity. The additional posts, 1.5 social work posts which went in have, of course, they've supported with the capacity within the districts, and some districts like Cannock, they are for the first time that they are stabilizing in staffing, which is a reflection of change in leadership and the progression that we have embedded through deputy district leads, but also the faith in the vision and plans for Staffordshire. ENPS is a reflection of staff morale within children's, which has been consistently negative, and post-transformation it did have a bit of a nosedive. But since the investment was approved, and for children's services, it's a very high, I would say it is quite a high-risk area to work in, social work, and there it's important for people to know that senior leadership has got their back. And this was, in a way, an approval that we've got you, and if there are problems, we will solve it together. So that's reflected in the ENPS survey. You can see staff turnover is reducing, and this slide reflects the greater interest. So post-transformation, when we were going out to recruit, we were hardly getting any interest. We were bleeding staff every single day. But since the investment, the the messaging outside Staffordshire, the narrative for Staffordshire is changing, and we are seeing an increase in not just increase in number of applications, but the quality and caliber of candidates that we are getting for those applications. The following few slides, and because I have a 5-minute deadline, I'll try and whiz them through. It's a district investment, so the deputy district leads, they have been recruited, their onboarding is complete at the time of writing this report, but now they are in the full swing of stuff in terms of giving that additional capacity, leadership, and looking at, child level data, planning, details, and having that better, embedding a culture of performance and better financial management. The main focus of this role is around children with disabilities, SEND and early help, and making sure that they amalgamate well within the district in line with the place-based approach and ideology that we try to embed with transformation plans. In terms of SEND key workers, all of them are in post. Education psychologists, yes, recruitment has been a challenge, but it is a challenge nationally, but we are working very hard to make sure that we recruit effectively and properly to those positions. The impact, we could be challenged that we promise that the workloads will reduce. However, what we can say now is the demand has increased significantly, and you must be aware about that. But this increased investment has helped us manage those demands and still manage to move along with our plans within APP to deliver good quality services. Central services, the IRO services, for the first time, it's a full establishment now. We've got good caliber applications. We've recruited. They're all onboarded and in posts. The average workloads have gone down, but it's still a bit of a stretch from the ideal workloads that they should be. However, with reducing the number of children on CP plans and reducing the number of children in care, hopefully we will get to the ideal caseloads by the end of this financial year. Impact on children and families, it is that robustness of oversight, making sure there is no drift in planning and achieving outcomes for children, which is key for the role of an IRO. What happens, an IRO looks after a child on a child protection plan, on children who are looked after. So it's important that IRO manages the delivery, the traction of that plan with speed and efficacy. So if we can manage our children subject to CP plans and close those plans down in a timely way, that means we are reducing the risk from escalating into children in care arena, and we are managing risk better in the community. And that is what is reflected in this slide, where you can see that the number of child protection plans within Tier 4 services is reducing gradually, and we are getting that better effective challenge in the service and challenge out to the partnership to be able to have that team around the child and support them better in community. Moving on to central services. Oh, I don't know what happened with this. I never did this. Okay. So within central services, I think I'm most excited about our missing, because that was an area which really worried me before, because we did not have enough staffing to manage the challenge of exploitation. We are seeing an increase. Previously, the hub was in the north of the county, but now, well, over the last year or so, we are seeing it increase in the south of the county, in Cannock and Burton area. So now with this increased investment, and we've recruited to all the roles, we now can move on with the aspirations of getting the strategic and operational governance developed in line with the staffing we've got. We are working much better with the police and the harm reduction hubs in the community to make an effective partnership network of support for those youngsters who are at risk of being exploited. So this is something that it needs a lot more work, because we are in the commissioning cycle around exploitation. But we have got the people who will be able to deliver our aspirations and safeguard children subject to exploitation. Well-being and partnerships. We have recruited to all the posts that were agreed. Again, very critical roles. The QA officer role within our commissioning service has a very important role, especially with all these government regulations that are coming around Ofsted oversight of residential provision. Residential provision, as you may all know, is already scarce in the country. And with additional Ofsted scrutiny and tight oversight, as much as the oversight is right in terms of managing the provision, what it does is creates a level of scare within the provider that they do not want to have anything which is close to challenging, because they are worried that the Ofsted will come and shut them down the next day. Because when you have two challenging kids, there are bound to be things that will escalate. what is important is to help those issues de-escalate rather than refuse a child. Because any child who goes into residential is a complex child. So you cannot have residential and non-complex together. QA officers help us work with our providers to diffuse those situations, to make sure there is enough safeguards in place from the provider aspect and from the local authority and the safety plan for that child. So it helps diffuse those situations of worry with the provider where they are worried about Ofsted coming in and shutting them down. So that's a critical role, and we've got that capacity to manage all those children who are out there and develop a better collaborative relationship with the providers. And the commissioning support officers are, of course, looking at better, more creative ways of tackling the market and the market forces which are purely working against us at this point in time. The cost of care is sky high, and the provision equally is very challenging to find for some of our difficult, more complex children. Moving on, business support, the backbone of every service, and we've managed to recruit to that post. There is a best review which is ongoing in the background, but this provides additional capacity for the posts that we have already recruited to. So it's critical, very helpful. And that's it. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Councillor Perry.
Thank you. Could I just take you back to page 18, please? Hang on, let me find it myself again now. It's a question, maybe I've missed something or maybe I've read it wrong. I'm looking at the ones where you identify each district. And South Staffordshire, you were recruiting, have I got this right, you were recruiting quite well and then it's dropped down. Can you see? No, page 18.
Sorry, Kath, page 18
yeah.
on my slides is the ENPS journey.
No, it's this one.
The one with the tables, yeah,
Sorry.
gotcha, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Gotcha.
That's the one. Can you see where it's got, I noticed that South Staffordshire is quite, if I've read it right at the bottom, which is like from the 1st of the 7th, 21 to 22, and then 22 to 23. It looks as though recruitment's gone down, not recruitment, it looks as though applications have gone down in South Staffordshire. Am I reading that correctly? I just wondered if there's any reason why, or that you know of, why people aren't sort of coming forward for those kind of...
So South Staffordshire is one of our most stable districts.
Right, okay.
And it has stable district and the least worrying district for me because of lesser complexities in that district. So it may well be, I will have to closely interrogate that one, but it may well be that we don't advertise that many for South Staffordshire because there are not that many vacancies. It's very stable, permanent team, yeah.
Yeah, I understand. It was just like, I looked at the others.
Yes.
Okay. I looked at the others and that seems to be the one that's sort of completely dropped down, hasn't it, if you look at it, the scale. And I just wondered if there was any reason why. I understand what you've just said, but it's still sort of significant as far as I'm concerned. Thank you. Yeah, yeah.
I suppose the interesting thing with that, Kathy, is the fact that it has dropped. I suppose if traditionally the number of applications were low, but it continued to be low, then there's no change. It's why I suppose it's gone down from around about 15 applications per vacancy to something like about five or six. But I think without looking at the actual detail of the applications, it's probably, I suppose ultimately it is whether we get the right person for the right job, isn't it?
I mean, I noticed there as well, actually, you could probably read it as a positive, couldn't you? Because as you say, it sounds like it's stable. We don't advertise because there are fewer vacancies. Councillor Bennett.
Hi. I was just wondering, on page 12, where it says we've got 2 SEND senior key workers short, I know you had filled the vacancies and then people have gone elsewhere, and we're advertising more vacancies, but what's the impact of running with 2 short for the children and their families? I know it's more work for the staff, but how does it impact on the children and the families, please?
So we were 2 short at the time of writing this report, which was in July. So we were going through that round of recruitment at the time. So we've recruited to those posts. It is my understanding we might not have onboarded them yet. So they have been recruited to. In terms of, sorry, forgive me, you wanted to know how does that impact on children and families. So I think the way we see it is if we didn't have that capacity, then it's an additional physical and mental pressure on existing staff. But because you see there is people who are coming on board, people are more willing to work better and work more to tie from A to B. And it is a challenge because the volume of work is still there, increase in demand. So I think my colleague Tim, if he was here, he would be able to better explain exactly what it is like on the ground. I can go back and find out for you, but from what I'm picking up from my conversations with Hallett is they are working and the communication with family, they're constantly in communication with families around what support they need and how best to support them. So I don't think the challenges are there. I can't say they are not, but we are working through those.
So is it making that some of the children and families have got a longer wait before they get a key worker, or they're not getting as fast a service as we would like to give? That's what I'm getting at, really, I think.
I think, Jill, inevitably, if you look at the fact that one of the key areas that we needed investment where there certainly wasn't sufficient staff when you consider how many education and healthcare plans that we're now getting and having to do was consistently going up. Pressure on key workers was identified as an issue, and as you can see there from that table, the recommendation senior key workers was 12 full-time equivalents. So 10 of those are already in position, and as Nisha said, two positions have to be re-advertised. So actually, we're in a much better position than where we are. If we've got 10 in addition, and we'll always going forward, won't we? We'll always have vacancies. People come and people go. We'll always be in a position where there are one or two vacancies. It's getting that level of vacancies down to a reasonable level. Every organisation needs a little bit of churn to bring new people in and bring other people on. But the bottom line is we're in a much better position than we were before this investment.
Thank you for that. Just a couple of things from me. I think the timeline on page 13 identifies the sheer amount of work that clearly has gone on. And I think that's very encouraging to see that it has been quite an holistic approach to what the issues are. I also think some real good news within the reports. The impact on staff seems to be very positive. And there's a whole host of other things, including these QA officers. I could never work out what QA stood for, but being able to recognise and deal quickly with any difficulties within some of our homes with the most challenging people, rather than constantly having to bat them from one place to another, does sound to me to be a really positive way forward. Having said all of that, just a quick question around that. The strategy about making Staffordshire a nice place to work and where people want to come. And I noticed you said right at the beginning, it is about identifying the level 9s and 10s and the existing staff. And then where we see the gaps, we go outside to look for additional people. One of the consequences of that, isn't it, is that are we then denying ourselves access to what would be very good people externally? I understand the drive to give people internally a better progression. And also, and it's probably highlighted more in the second paper than this one, but we seem to accept that part of the difficulties that we have as an organisation are cultural, and that is about people getting used to and not having that flexibility. How do we protect ourselves, A, against losing potentially really good people by limiting going outside? I've said I understand the need to offer something to the people who are already here. But also, perhaps more importantly, how do we guard against this culture if we are constantly promoting internal people that presumably will carry on with the same culture? Like I say, in the next paper we seem to highlight it as a major concern. I think the two things need to be in balance. How do we manage that process?
So Mr. Chairman, I think you hit at it at the end, doesn't it? It is a balance. I mean, for many years, and we're no different to lots of other local authorities, had difficulty in recruiting and maintaining our staff and keeping social workers. And we got into this situation around the West Midlands, and I would imagine other regions are the same. And I tried to do a little bit of work in my role with the lead members group across the region. Excuse me. Is what would happen is that everybody would have vacancies, and to get people, other authorities would offer some sort of limited golden handshake or increase the salaries where they possibly could and do that type of thing, and our social workers would go, and then other authorities would do the same, and you got a massive amount of movement. And post-transformation and during transformation we lost staff. Many of those have returned and come back now, but it is a balance, isn't it? It's a balance between people thinking, if I go and work there will be opportunities, but also that I will have development opportunities to be able to get on, enhance my skills and my career. And if I have to move somewhere else, then I'll happily move somewhere else, but then I might come back. And balancing that against, well, here in Staffordshire, things are great, and I'll happily stay here if the opportunities are there. And what we found with those particular roles, that for a lot of our senior staff, there was nowhere to go other than potentially to leave. That progression wasn't necessarily there. But I think the bottom line has got to be is that any process to recruit a member has to be fair and equitable, and people have that opportunity, and you're able to advertise them externally and get external staff who bring things, and internal staff. But the higher you get up the table, if you bring people in from the outside, there's a longer wait, there's training, and there's a balance. And Bob, you and I will know, and we went from an organisation when we first joined the police where everything was internal, nobody ever seemed to come externally, and then that went through 360. It is a balance. I think if you lose too many staff, it's unhealthy. People don't know the systems when they come in. They don't necessarily have the buy-in. But equally, you can't have a stagnant staff where all the staff have been there for 25 years and have never moved on, and have never been developed. So if you've got a culture where people who stay know there are opportunities, and there are opportunities to move around the organisation. And I've been out visiting all the district leads and talking to those over the past few weeks or so. And what the district leads tell me is that there are now, and I've been talking to them about opportunities for staff to be able to develop, do the next roll up for a short period of time, and trying to get some feedback on whether we as an organisation offer that, and that's there. And what I think it does is because it's a small, the higher you get up the social work league, it's a small world, and people talk to each other, and they've all at some stage in the past worked with each other. And I think the reputation that an authority has got goes out there, and people will say, oh, I was thinking of a job in X authority, and somebody else will say, well, I don't touch it with a barge pole. And I think particularly across the whole of this organisation and not just in children's services. We're changing that ethos. Staffordshire is to be the place to go and work, and whether you then get opportunities internally or externally, they will be there and you will be supported. You will get high challenge, but with high support. And I appreciate I've waffled around it a little bit, but you picked up on the thing, it's a balance. You can't have either end of the spectrum, and it's all about developing your staff's leadership, isn't it? To think that they are supported and challenged.
No, thank you for that. I think that sounds really encouraging, and as you alluded to in the organisation that we used to work in, you know, sometimes you see poor attitudes and behaviours, and the danger is when you promote those people, you give them a louder voice, you give them a bigger platform, you give them bigger influence. And I think if we recognise that there is a difficulty in culture in the organisation, I do understand that we have to reward our existing staff and give them a reason to stay, but we also need to reach that balance that says, how do we choose people who want to make a difference and actually want to do this and want to deliver for us? Nisha, I think you wanted to say something.
Yes, I just wanted to share our planning and our thinking behind it, because as you said, and as Councillor Sutton said, it's important to retain and grow our staff and invest in them so that we are seen as a supportive organisation. But the way we manage the quality of that staff is to have high thresholds within progression. So progression is not a done deal, that if you start at a grade 9, you will reach a grade 15 in Staffordshire. You've got that. We maintain standards of moving from one grade to the other, and that's the progression strategy. So it's not a given that as a salary increment you get moved from one post to the other. So that's how we quality assure. And if we can't recruit to that post, we will go externally, because at the end of the day, the business needs need to be met in line with the vision and aspiration of what Staffordshire wants for its people. And so that's how we manage the quality of staff that stay with us in Staffordshire. And if we need, we will go out and recruit and still maintain that quality. In terms of culture, and as we've heard, I mean, Councillor Sutton said it, yourself has said it, it's the culture of organisation is created by many things. Where we went wrong in Staffordshire was we became very insular. We were only looking inside, and we were probably not moving with the times. And so the culture became more and more risk averse. As you have more child deaths, you have more press interest into children's services, the culture becomes more risk averse rather than managing that risk. And that's what we are seeing. So I think what we have, again, from transformation, we've got an approach and a vision, we got the structure, and we now have that leadership which changed after transformation, which is now more outward looking. So we bring that learning in, and we grow and develop, and we have established those mechanisms that we are developing as a learning organisation. So I am confident as the AD in Staffordshire now that there are people out there who are better, and we can recruit if we need to, and if they are interested in us. But first we have to make ourselves interesting enough for great people to come and join us, which is a learning culture and good progression opportunities and support. But in other ways, we will create those good people ourselves. So we don't need to look outside all the time, because we might not find that right person outside all the time.
Thank you. Like I say, that's incredibly encouraging to hear that. And it's also encouraging to hear that sort of standards approach to where people progress isn't compromised, because we just need to constantly stick internally. So thank you for that. Councillor Wilcox, I think you wanted to ask a question.
Thank you, Chairman. On page 13, where you've got the calendar and all the progression during the 12 months, so it seems to me that from virtually at the end of this year, we'll have spent the whole year either producing job descriptions, consultation, customer feedback and recruitment in that 12-month period. When we talk about job descriptions, have we fundamentally changed the job descriptions of what the roles are from other authorities, and how is that one of the reasons why we think we'll be able to retain and keep people longer? Secondly, has some of the recruitment come internally or have a good chunk of it come externally? And from the consultation that you did with staff, have you picked up any sort of reoccurring issues from that you've been able to either put in or adjust into the job descriptions that makes it more attractive to people to stay with us? And then finally, so what difference will this make for the organisation of all this investment? Is there any targets to see less children in care, or what will good look like if we're to roll forward to the first quarter of next year? What would good look like in the view of the authority? Thanks, Chairman.
I'll let Nisha answer the more detailed questions about where people have come from internally, so I don't know. I would just ask, could we park the question about children in care to the next stuff, because we will cover that in great detail. What I will say, the consultation and all that, and then having to work with the trade unions and get the feedback, and that wasn't about any of the recruitment for the posts we'd authorised. It was about those roles that would change slightly, or we needed to do a job description for, not taking on an extra 12 send key workers and that type of thing. But I'll let Nisha answer in a little bit more detail your questions, Mike.
Thank you. So in terms of the job descriptions, yes, like the deputy district lead, that post didn't exist. I must impress that our district model is unique, and we do not have, well, I am not aware of any children's services which has got SEND sitting within its district. SEND usually just sits with education, and children's has got very little to do with it. So what was radical in this district model and right for children and families was to bring it all together. So SEND, exclusion, early help, all sits within districts. So that's why deputy district lead sort of a role does not exist in many places. It might, some variations might, but it didn't. So we had to make it bespoke for Staffordshire. And similarly, grade 11 roles. We have been quite aspirational about that grade 11 role. It's not a pure social work role that we want to do just more of social work. It's a role which brings an element of learning and development, so that you're not always looking for training outside. We are bringing that element in-house and more hands-on, so that people learn as they do. They have somebody very close in their service which is helping them do that, and they're also helping with our grow our own strategy, because when you have a caseload of 22, you do not have time to grow a newly qualified or a student within that same service, because it's additional burden. So we have taken inspiration from other places, because there are variations of that role, but we have made it specific for us as Staffordshire. So that took a bit of time, and because we engaged people early on, post-consultation, we didn't have anything that needed the JDs to be changed. So we have gone straight into recruitment for deputy district leads. We have appointed, onboarded, and they are in the full swing of things. In terms of recruitment, were the majority internal or not? As I said earlier, the threshold was very high, and the people who had been with Staffordshire for a long period of time, out of 4 deputy district leads, only 1 was recruited internally, the 3 were external, because the expectations were set, and we would never compromise on that. So that was around recruitment, internal versus external. The other thing you said about, well, I've answered that question around changes in JD after consultation. And the last one was, what difference will it make? So yes, we will park the question around children in care numbers, because that's the following presentation, but as a service to the people, children and families in Staffordshire, there are many other things that children and families does, and our aspiration is, we learn from complaints all the time. You don't talk enough to us, you don't talk in a timely way to us, there are too many changes of social workers for us, and I don't know what my plan is. All those questions get answered when you have a stable and able workforce in your system, and you've got one vision driving the whole system. So this allows the district model to embed, because now the district lead, who is the one decision maker for the entire district, has got the headspace, because you've got the deputy looking after the day-to-day operational for a large volume of work that is happening. So embedding the culture of performance, managing quality, making sure financial input. So all of that work is done and reporting into district leads. So it brings more efficient team around the child within districts. It brings that synergy. So it's all of those things that is a good service to children and families. So timely resolution of issues at early help, CIN, child in need stage, or child protection stage is also an achievement when you have got that stable and able workforce and consistency in leadership, which is helping you drive the work within the system. So I think apart from children in care, which we will talk about, there are many other parameters that we can look at and measure the successes.
Councillor Eagley.
Thank you, Chair. I'm very impressed with the way that you're recruiting and the special way you're going about it, changing all the application forms and getting the right people in the job. In the past, we've trained these people and we've worked with them and they've left to go to other places. Is there a way that you may have that if somebody who is valued and is a specialist in what they're employed for, is there a way that they've got to come to somebody if they're finding the work too much or they don't like what they're doing? Is there a process for these people that we've managed to recruit? Is there a way in for them to say, I'm not happy, or is there a way for them not just to go get promotion, but for them to find out, you know, if they're feeling unhappy?
So the answer to that, a straightforward answer is yes. If anybody has an issue with the direct line manager, they can always go to the manager above. It's an open door policy. That's, again, injecting into the culture of the organization. It's not centralized at a top level. Everybody is a leader, and it's a no blame culture. It's a restorative approach to problem solving, which is high challenge, but also high support. So no blame. It's a mistake, we will learn and we will move on. So people feel more able to be able to come and have that conversation with their managers, with their peers. And we have established that role of the principal social worker, who is one across the whole of organization. So if anybody feels I can't speak to my line manager or anybody else in the organization, they can go and speak to the principal social worker, who is not managing anybody, but is a key role to maintain standards, quality, consistency across the board. Every exit interview goes through the PSW as well. Unless the person wants somebody else, they're more than happy to give an exit interview to their line manager, they can do. But if not, they can go to that PSW, principal social worker, who is more of an independent person. I have always had an open door policy. People always come to my room and speak to me. If they need to, they write to me. And we have those regular engagement sessions with staff where they can have those conversations with us if they feel that there is something they want to say. So I'm confident there are plenty of avenues for that.
Thank you for that. Councillor Wilkin.
Thank you, Chairman. I think you may well have mentioned this earlier on, but the impact in central services, you talk about the average workloads being too high and ideally getting them down to 50 to 70. Do you think we'll ever get down to that position? And in doing that, how will we get to that position? Would that be having to recruit more people to get to that position? Because if the caseload is still quite high, won't that necessarily deter some people from perhaps staying with the organisation if they think that perhaps going elsewhere the workload would be less for them? Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. So the only way we can bring that workload down is, one, to hold that service responsible for the throughput as well. Because if you keep adding more people, there is no incentive, because people can just keep the caseloads and not manage their own throughput. So it's, again, managing the performance of that service to say you've got a role to manage your own workload. So, and that is by helping services achieve the outcome in a timely way and close those cases down, or manage it more in the community rather than escalate up. So because of the Children in Care program, me and my leadership team is almost watching every child every single day and the traction in their plan. I mean, I am not watching every child every single day, but I've got people who are looking at those plans and managing that throughput. And there is a responsibility on the IRO service to manage that throughput rather than just continue to escalate and keep those children in the system. So again, it's a two-pronged approach. Address the culture, that it has to be an institutional independent plan, do not create institutional dependence in children and families. And the second is helping them get there. And my job is to I'm at a systems level, making sure I'm working with the partnership who are not just throwing everything in the local authority pot to manage, but are managing it collectively with us. It is a challenge, but I'm confident we will get there. The number of children in care, we will get to, again, we will get there by the end of this year where we want to be, because it's all tracked and mapped behind the scenes. That will bring the numbers down, but of course nobody knew Ukraine war will happen, nobody knew COVID will happen. If something else comes into the mix, we'll go back to the drawing board and plan again. But they know what we are trying to do to make their life more livable and to bring those workloads down, and they are fully behind it, so I'm confident we'll get there.
Again, I think that's really encouraging to hear that, and also that there is an onus on each of these teams to manage workloads. I think that seems to be a quantum leap away from perhaps where some organisations were previously. If there are no other questions, just to wrap up, I think it feels like we're in a good place here. Obviously, the test of that is whether those figures come down at the end. But having read through it and listened to your presentation and answered the questions, I do find it encouraging, and I think that we are in the best place that we can be. It strikes me that we have addressed the issues that were clearly evident previously. I hate to say all of this and then the numbers don't come down, but we're in the best place to make that happen, it feels like to me. So thank you for that. Thank you for coming along and answering the questions as well. It's been really helpful. We'll move on then to item 5, Children in Care Programme Update. Mark, did you want to open that?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'll just say a few words to start with, if I may. Members will know that the numbers of our children in care is relatively high. 104 of those children are unaccompanied children seeking asylum, and many of those, and that number's gone up from 40 to about 104 over a relatively short period of time. So we do not have an awful lot of control over those numbers here. We get what comes in. There is no doubt, and I'm sure Nisha will talk about this, is that over a period of time, and that was pre-transformation as well as post the transformation, is that as an authority, we were not particularly good at working to, once children come into care, working on plans to see how we could potentially reunite them with families or do other things. And that comes about for a number of things. It can be the culture, that's just not what we've done. It could be the process, that's not within the process, so we get used to not doing it. It could be an element of workload that when a team gets and they've dealt with the child and the child now in care, it's a little bit of, okay, we'll move on to the next case, and about not developing a plan to look at those opportunities, ensure that family ties as far as possible are met, so that we can look at opportunities going forward, particularly in children that come into care who are in their later teens. What the whole of Children in Care programme is not about is making it difficult to bring or changing the thresholds so that children can't come into care. If that is the appropriate thing to do, then children will come into care. But what we have to have is a process where, prior to that, through early help and plenty of other things, and with our own teams, he's worked hard with families, with that family around that child and with other things to try and ensure that we get the best outcome for that child, and and where it's all possible, keep that child in the family home where it is safe to do so, and then continue that process of working together with that family. If that child is then subject of a plan, and we're working and we're on the edge of care. So there's lots of things going on. Nisha will be able to go through them in far more detail, but I just wanted to give a sort of overall emphasis of an understanding of where we are at this moment in time. And of course, we do have difficulties, like every authority has, is with finding suitable and appropriate placements that are at a reasonable cost, because some of the placements are at sky high rates, and we need to move away from a situation where the provider has the upper hand and drives the market, to where local authorities who are looking for good and appropriate places for children have the upper hand, and not the providers who then can decide, to arbitrary to set absolutely unrealistic prices, and quite often, not all the time, but quite often, not deliver the care that gives the good outcome for that child, and that is ultimately the most important thing out of all this. So if I may, I'll hand over to Nisha, and she will do exactly what we did for the other item, if that's okay.
Thank you for that. Nisha, over to you.
Thank you, Chair. So we'll start with a bit of background around the Children in Care programme. So Children in Care has been a priority for children's services for quite a period of time. What we realised, especially since I took over from my predecessor, was we had transformation at the time, October 2021, when the new structure landed, and we knew the financial status where we were in, we knew the aspiration and the numbers where we wanted to get to. And even though the idea was there in the service that we need to do something about our children in care, the goal that we had to reach didn't match with the planning that we had behind it. The assumption was, we have said that we need to reduce the number of children in care, and that it will happen. What we saw between 2021 and in my first 6 to 8 months was, we needed to have a consolidated approach if we wanted to get our ambition and our targets. And for that purpose, and with the support of other directors within the County Council, we managed to establish it as a Children in Care Programme Board, where we are planning, monitoring, problem solving constantly to get to the goal that we need to get towards. So we consolidated the Programme Board in October 22. It did take us some time to understand why the previous system didn't work or wasn't working for us, because we were consistently missing the targets by a mile, if I can say so. So we established and consolidated the program. It had 3 key objectives, which were about reducing the number coming into the care system, because our district model talks about help at the earliest opportunity in the community. The focus was about exiting children from our care system. We know it from our performance. We knew it from the Newton report that Staffordshire was one of the worst local authorities in terms of finding permanence outside the care system. So we brought children in care and we kept them in care. We still are doing that, but we are improving slightly, and you will see as we go through it. And the last one is about, of course, making it financially viable, making the service financially viable. So those were the 3 key priorities for this program. And it was communicated to the whole service in no uncertain terms. The way it is translated to our frontline staff, so if any of you ever was to visit a district and was ever to engage with our frontline staff, is in social care, if we are just talking about finances and budgets, because social workers are focused, rightly so, on achieving the right outcomes for children. And that was the background work before consolidating this Children in Care program was, by keeping them in care, you are not really doing a service to those children, because at the age of 18, they are at a cliff edge, because they've had such good care in our care that at 18, when they are as an adult, in their own house, in the community, they're not equipped to deal with those challenges. Because the reality, the sad reality of every child in care is you have to become an adult at 18. Our children can still stay at home, still mess about, and we will be there to support them all the time. But for those children who are in care, have to deal with the realities of life in the community, and we are not preparing them. And that messaging took a bit of time because it was a shock to the system within children's that, oh, so you're telling me that we need to send these kids out to a parent we assessed who were neglectful towards them. So it's a totally different mindset that you have to be in if you want to deal with the risk in the community. Life is full of risk. It's how you risk manage and how you support that risk in the community or mitigate that risk in the community is the key to that, to achieving independence for our youngsters. So that's the message you will see at the front line. It is about finances, because as a household you manage your finances, so why don't you do it as a local authority? But the messaging is about getting it right for children, and care is not the right place. So that is what was established by the program board. The short-term successes of this program board, if I may say so, is we have looked at, through our cohort analysis, each and every individual child's plan. Because the default position when I came into the service was, once a child come into plan, the exit date is their 18th birthday. That was the first thing I said, absolutely not. You will exit the child when it is safe to do so at the earliest opportunity, and you will create that safe to do so environment with your working out. So we've looked at all the plans, and we're constantly looking, because systems change, things change, community changes, life changes. The other success is the numbers coming in have reduced, and if you have Power BI and you're looking at it, you will start to see that the numbers coming in has reduced quite dramatically, and the ones which are coming in are not going into residential as they previously were. So what that means is one child in residential means £250,000 a year at its minimum, and it only goes up from there. But a child who goes into a kinship arrangement, in a family arrangement, or in a fostering arrangement, at the most a fostering arrangement will cost you just under £100,000. I think it's 80,000 70,000 if it's internal, or something thereabouts if it's an external IFA foster placement, independent foster placement. So it's things like that, and that's where it makes the difference as to how you plan, where you plan, and when you bring children in care. So numbers have reduced. Overall number of children, excluding the UASC numbers, as Councillor Sutton said, overall children in care has reduced. And we are starting to make an improvement in exiting children in care now, because that culture, and for people to feel safe that this is the right plan for children, took a bit of time. But we are getting on that change curve. So we've gone down with the shock and horror, and we are coming out at the other end now in our service. And I can feel that service moving upwards, which is a good place to be. And what we have also identified through all these pieces of work that we have been doing within this program board is there is this initial bit about capacity. There are children where we have agreed they are ready to exit our care system, but the capacity to address the work that needs to be done is missing. So we have used some of our cabinet investment, and this is where the overlap from the previous presentation is. We've used some of the funding that we had saved because we haven't recruited to those social work positions so far. We've used some of the funding to fund a discharge planning team, which will give us extra capacity between now and end of this financial year to move those children's plans out of the system, which will create capacity for our IRO service and our social workers. Culture, we've talked about it, and we can talk more if anyone wants to know. The culture needed to change from risk averse to being risk aware and risk managing. Restorative practice, great tool to work with, but restorative practice doesn't automatically exit children from care. Restorative practice needs to be, it's a method by which you work with a family to make them or enable them to deal with the risks themselves with a little bit of support from institutional support. What was missing throughout restorative practice was we conveniently left high challenge out of the restorative practice because it was too difficult to have those challenging conversations, and we only were going with the high support element of restorative practice. It doesn't work that way. So we brought that in. So that's the whole bit of culture change which is working behind the scenes. It still needs some work done. That high challenge and high support go together, and challenge could be done in a constructive way. It doesn't have to be in an argumentative way. And that's what we're bringing, a true restorative picture into our culture change. What is data telling us? I would like to look at the blue line more. The brown line is where we would have been if we continued at the rate that we were at the start of this program. But where we are, it says 1296 on the slide, which was at the time when I did this presentation. Today we are at 1272. So we have gone further down. So the numbers have reduced. Our key challenges, which I wanted to share, was, and I think it's important to acknowledge this, reduction is not everyone's priority. So it might be priority for local authority, but it's not the priority for health, for police, for voluntary sector, for Ofsted. Reduction is not their priority. And the system is working against us and has been for a long period of time, because as soon as there is a challenge, over to you, local authority, and we are out of it. That system has to be shaken and challenged, and that's what we are doing as a leadership team within the County Council, including our Chief Exec. So John Henderson was heavily involved, and now Pat would be, and so is Neelam, so is Mark, so is myself. Everybody is working to challenge that system. The partnership, the judiciary, CAFCAS, all of these systems needed to be challenged to say the right outcomes for children, because financial outcomes are for us as a local authority, it's not for the partners. For them, the worry is about getting it right for the child, to create productive adults in the community post-18, not dysfunctional adults in the way, if we carry on with the way. Culture, we've talked about, I wouldn't go into any more detail. Challenges in community resilience, it's a big thing because COVID has had an impact on the way the community functions, the way society functions, and people's resilience, families' resilience. I don't know what has happened. Well, I do know what has happened, but it's about, previously where there would be those grandparents supporting those, families who were struggling, that support system is almost vanishing. There was a lot of community resources which work together around families, which is now diminishing. So it's, everybody wants to give a leaflet and assume that a dysfunctional or struggling parent will be able to deal with it. Where that support we need to rebuild and have more joint up approach, because there is resources, police invests, health invests, we invest, adults invest. We need to have a more joined up approach to increase that community resilience, because otherwise things will always escalate. They will never de-escalate, and de-escalation will become more and more difficult. Resources, as Councillor Sutton said, placement sufficiency and response to trauma is an area of deficiency. So market forces at this point are a challenge. There have been various national reports and media interest into that arena, that there isn't sufficient placements and arrangements which are cost effective and meet the needs of children as we see, as local authorities are seeing. That's a challenge. We're working with it. We have got a sufficiency strategy. Inflation is a challenge, and high level of interdependencies with other projects. I did want to put this in because Children's Services feels very busy. We've got a workforce program going on which is working on all the things that we've talked about in the earlier session. Then we've got Children in Need, then we have got SEND, the APP plan, and then there is business as usual. And it's the same people who are doing everything. So it feels very busy, which sometimes presents as a challenge, but because we have this Children in Care Program Board, we constantly recalibrate and bring ourselves on the drawing board and in line with where we should be. So that's what we are working. So I think I've talked, as I have talked through the challenge, majority of the things on what actions are we taking. And then I'll just whiz through this one because you have seen the slides. We have got the discharge planning team. It's a short-term intervention to add extra capacity until the end of this financial year. And we plan to exit roughly 80 to 120 children by the end of this financial year. We've got the background work already done, but it's working with judiciary because the courts need as so many dates to discharge a care plan. CAFCAS need extra capacity to appoint. We need to have social workers who will do all the paperwork and attend and do the work that needs to be done. Residential mapping, this is where we are looking at, one, embedding the culture towards preparing our youngsters for independence. And the second is, this is where your biggest financial savings are. As I said, every residential arrangement starts at $250,000 and then only goes upwards. At this point in time, 4 unregulated children are costing me $3 million. it's too much. So 18, at the time of writing this report, there were 16 youngsters we had planned to step down from residential into semi-supported accommodation. Now there are 18 youngsters. I can confidently say of those 18, 14 have already stepped down, and the other 4 are on course. By mid of October, they would have stepped down into their semi-supported accommodation, which will have a financial impact on the deficit. Reunification support offer, again, this is one of those where children are in our care. Staff needs to have the framework within which they work, and managers need to have a tracking mechanism that they are looking at and managing the exit of children from care. And reunification support offer has done a lot of work from last October until now. So we now have all the policy, the guidance, the framework approved. We are trying to get the system improvement done for tracking mechanism, but there are certain challenges. We were hoping that by October we'll have it, but now I've been told it is shifted to end of November. So we'll keep working on that. But the first cohort which follows within this plan will be from January 2024. Edge of care service review is a big one. We do have edge of care service at this point in time. Our intensive prevention team works fantastically well, but it's a small team and a small team of staff who almost have become like an emergency service. So when there is a crisis, that's when they get involved because of capacity issues. So we have had an options paper, and we have also realized by looking elsewhere, so other local authorities like Essex, like Wolverhampton, who are doing very well on their children in care programs, we have taken some learning from them, and what they do is they have got a psychological offer which is working alongside their edge of care services. So a paper went yesterday to the Joint Commissioning Board, which is a start of a conversation because it engages ICB in that, because that is where we will be sourcing or working together to get that psychological support within the service to provide for those children who are on the edge of care or in care. So that work is ongoing. IRO service, we've talked about it in the previous session. IRO service has a huge responsibility around making sure we have the right children in plan and children in our care, and they stay in our care for as least amount of time as possible, so that we embed our permanence strategy of achieving outcomes for children in community setting at the earliest opportunity. We are now fully staffed, a little bit higher workload, but we will get there. As I said, if by the end of the year, discharge planning team works to the plan as we have, their caseloads will come in line, and we should start to see the work churning out from that service of better oversight, better grip, better challenge. What we are doing in the meantime is changing the culture in the IRO service, because previously the IROs that we have had for a period of time with us were bought into that view of children are safest in care, so bring them in care and keep them in care. So it's challenging that ideology at this point in time, but I can see they are moving on that trajectory with the change. Culture change, we've talked about it, so I will leave it at that, but there are many planned activities. What we have realized up until now, culture change has been about me influencing my leadership team into buying into that culture of from risk averse to risk aware and risk managing, from safe certainty to safe uncertainty. But now we are planning to do some focus pieces of work, have clear practice, expectation, guidance, support. So it is a structured culture change program which we are trying to embed from now going forward, so that it lasts in the service. It doesn't go away if one of us was to leave the local authority. That is Staffordshire. That's how we work. So it's future-proofing that. This is a timeline which almost shows the traction from when the program board got established to where we are now, and how different projects within the program have influenced the change process. And what is data telling us? Again, this was Q1 analysis, where we were saying if there was no change, we would be 10.2 million overspend. In Q2, I think it has come slightly down, but we can provide an update if that is needed. But at least that gap is not as big as we were last year. So we are trying to close that gap, and by the end of the year, I will not make no promises that we will meet the budget line, but we will be as close as we possibly can be. And there is a lot of work that is happening to get there. This is a harsh reality that I face every day, and I can't sugarcoat it anymore, but the rate of our children in care is still quite high, but it is a reality that we share with our management team all the time, that we are out of kilter. Don't look at West Midlands, because West Midlands is made up of a different set of local authorities. We are comparing ourselves with our stat neighbours, and there is a gap that we need to meet. But what this helps us is, and assures me as an AD, is the projections that we have now made for our MTFS, the aspiration where we want to get to, is setting us in line with our stat neighbours, because we are aspiring, so we are slightly more aspirational than our stat neighbours. So if everything works to plan, in a few years' time, we should be in line or better performing than our stat neighbours. That's the projection line for us. The path ahead, there is a challenge around the speed at which we need to achieve outcomes along the lines of MTFS, because we should have achieved those outcomes 5 years ago. So we are chasing our tail and badly. So the speed at which we need to get there, but the amount that we need to do as a culture change whilst we are embedding staffing and whilst we are embedding the vision of transformation. It feels very busy, but we are up for that challenge. I have a very solid leadership team now, which really helps me. And as a partnership, when we are working with when I say system, so when we are working with our partners, judiciary, CAFCAS, they are all coming along to where we need to get to. So I feel positive. What we do need to do is to maintain a steady ship. Even though it's a challenge and it's a constant recalibration of where we are, where we need to get to, we really need to maintain that steady ship to allow the change to embed and for us to come out at the other end. There are some upcoming pilots. There is a new case law which stops judiciary to make some court or care orders at home and place the burden of responsibility on local authority only. So I think that will help us going forward. So that's all from me for today.
Nisha, thank you very much for that. Mark?
If I may, Mr. Chairman, before we go to questions, just the graph that was being showed that showed the rate of children in care. Just wanted to say that, just emphasising from what Nisha said, the last 2 months I get the children in care figures I get them every week, and where all our children are placed. The last 2 months I've seen a net reduction in the children in care, and the amount of children exiting care has exceeded the amount of children coming in. And of course, as I indicated much earlier on, we have a higher rate of unaccompanied asylum seekers children than most local authorities, and that 83 would include that 83 figure there, albeit a few months out of date now, would include our total rate.
Thank you then. Just very quick question. Why do we exclude unaccompanied asylum seekers out from the numbers?
I mean, we don't exclude them in our top line figures. The data we send back always includes them. The reason I wanted to look at how our figures are without unaccompanied asylum seekers is because we've had such a rise in them recently. Previously, if we go back about 6 months, it was very, very static. So comparing one with another, it was a static rate in there. As we've taken more and more children who've come into Staffordshire who've presented to us at hotels and things like that, the amount we've got has gone up. So we can't do anything in particular to stem here in Staffordshire that rate. So I wanted to try and understand figures where what we are doing potentially has an impact. That's why I always look at the figures as well without those 104 children included in it. Albeit that doesn't mean to say we're ignoring that as an issue. And those children, get a service from us. We have to find accommodation. We have to have social workers dealing with that, as well as other parts of the whole system. So I don't do it for any other reasons other just the fact that we don't have an awful lot of influence on that, and I'm interested in the things that what we are doing to have an influence on the numbers, whether that's working or not.
No, that makes sense. Thank you for that. Councillor McMahon.
Thank you. First, my profuse apologies for being late. It's entirely my fault. I'm very heartened by what's been said, I have to say. My first question is about the asylum children. In all probability, they don't have English. And life's difficult enough for these kids without actually being able to. So I'm just interested in what provision is made for them to learn our language, and how quickly can they get up to speed to the point where they're functional, because it's only at that stage that you can really start to work with them. And I wouldn't say it was dead time between their arrival and that point, but it's not great until we do. And I know you've got interpreters and stuff, but they need to be able to speak English. That's the first question. The second one is about the exit strategy in terms of when they reach maturity. And I was particularly heartened by what you had to say. You can't just, open the door and let them out. And your point about resilience post-COVID, I think, is well made, although I think resilience was beginning to decline prior to COVID. But it's not just resilience, it's a lack of it. It's the isolation piece. And albeit in care, it is a community. Albeit it's not the sort of community one would wish in terms of it being supportive and helpful and functional to create rounded adults. It is a community of sorts. And to move from that, which is given, they don't have to work at it. They arrive and they're in a community whether they like it or not. And to move from that to then have to find their own community, I think is one of the biggest challenges they must have. So what sort of iterative processes do you have in order for them to be able to establish those skills whilst they're in a given community? That's it.
Okay, so great questions. Thank you for that. For you ask in terms of language, I just want to take a step back, Chair, to just say a piece that I want you to say in response to your question. UASC before October 2022 was a planned activity for local authorities, because they would only come into you through the NTS National Transfer Scheme, and it was a very planned activity across all local authorities, which was coordinated centrally. So we could manage the in and out from the system. Post October 2022, when Home Office started, getting these hotels and placing adults in those hotels, the landscape has completely changed. So Staffordshire has had the maximum number of hotels, Councillor Sutton, across the country who have been set up for housing asylum-seeking adults. And what we have seen is, even though the Home Office is placing them as adults in Staffordshire grounds, quite a lot of them are coming and claiming to be children. That is the reason for the influx and the sudden rise of this very unplanned UASC activity for children's. And that is the reason, because we have no control over it. There are those children, and as soon as they are identified and established as a child, we have a duty to provide that service. So we can't control the entry, and they only exit at the age of 18, if so, and they become a care leaver, because they don't get their asylum status resolved by the age of 18. So look, we still remain involved with them and continue to support them till their 21st birthday at least, or until their asylum is resolved, status and all that. So that is the level of work. And Staffordshire, again, very proud to be a part of Staffordshire, that we never shy away from our responsibilities. We always problem solve, and we never let anything fall just because it's a pressure or it's a demand or we don't have something. We find solutions to it. So now coming to your question around language, you're absolutely right to raise that challenge, because we did see when you have an influx of demand, where do you place all these youngsters? They are coming with different sets of languages. You don't have enough interpreters for the specific language that they speak. And then to bring them up to speed with English language is yet another challenge, because whilst Home Office and DFE don't talk to each other for some reason. And so Home Office has placed all these people on our grounds, but DFE will not fund enough education establishments to cater for the needs of those who are coming to us as children. So we in Staffordshire, again, we've joined hands across the corporate team to see who are the best people who can help us work with this problem. And we've liaised with the education providers in Stoke, because that's where most of our semi-supported accommodation is, and now also in Burton. So Stoke couldn't provide us that support for our education, but Burton did agree that they will make provision for our youngsters. The challenge to that was, how do you make provision for them to live in Burton? Because you can't transport those people from Stoke to Burton all the time. But we are problem solving it. I am not saying to you that I have got a 5-star service for all these youngsters, but we are problem solving it. And we are not letting any child fall through the net. So whilst we might not have the ESOL courses for them, we are working with the providers of the Amity Hub to create another hub and a space where youngsters can come, meet, feel a part of a community where there are other people or young people who have had similar experiences, so at least reduce their trauma. We are working with our partners, the police, the health, to make sure their needs are being met in the community. We have, I know my head of service was working on getting those, we don't have enough language specialists, but we need to communicate with our youngsters. So we are getting those specialist headphones where we can translate key messages for our youngsters, and they can listen and learn in their own time until such time that we can get a provider to provide a service for them. So we are trying our best. We are being as creative and innovative as we can be. We are constantly in conversation with Deluxe they check with us as well as to what we are doing and what we are not. And I think they quite appreciate the innovation that we have achieved in Staffordshire. But if you say, have we provided ESOL to every young person on day one of their children in care life? No, we haven't been able to, because there is not that provision, but it's not for not trying. The next question that you asked was around children care as a community. You absolutely are right. And how are we preparing our youngsters for independence in community? So we recently launched a house project. And a house project is that concept which builds lifelong links for young people in our care, with young people in our care. So this is the first that it started in Tamworth. So we start with a group of 10 youngsters who go through the training of how to clean your house, buy your shopping, do your laundry, wallpaper your wall, decorate your house, do all sorts of stuff, so that they maintain their tenancies, they have a good life, and they all grow and learn together. So growing forward, they all build that community together. So they all help each other and problem solve. And I was talking to some of those who have already been in other local authorities through the house project, and 3, 4, 5 years down the line, they are still helping paint each other's walls, look after each other's kids and all that. So they're growing together as a community. So we will take this learning from the house project. We'll let it grow and start. We're working with housing providers, because that was also an issue, to provide for a housing before their 18th birthday. That was a challenge. So we've come to the age of 17 and a half. I want them to come a little bit further at the age of 17. If we can have a house for our young people, it'll be brilliant, because they would have had 1 year with all that support, and then they can fly at 18. So yes, there are plans in train, but...
Councillor McMahon, did you want to come back?
I do. I think that's a great idea. I just had a thought about how you might want to monitor this. So in 10 or 15 years' time, I won't be sitting here, I'll tell you that. But future generations might want to say, well, since this radical shift in the way things were done for children, both in care and in the community, we have monitored their progress through adulthood over the last 10 or 15 years. We've looked at things like their involvement in the criminal justice system, their employment status and stuff like that, and compare it with the national average. So, so what you'd be doing is seeing that it works for adulthood. I can't think of any other way of doing it except on a long-term basis. But I would have thought that is something that you just might want to consider, so that when our successors are sitting around this table, they can look back and see what good you've done.
Thank you. Councillor Sutton, I think you wanted to add something.
Just picking up what Johnny said, I think that's a good idea that perhaps we can have a little look at. I wanted to just emphasise a little bit of what Nisha said about the house project. I was fortunate to have been involved in this from the start and went to the launch event, and prior to that had listened to a number of our children in care who were in our care do a pitch in so many words about why they thought it was a good idea, which was extremely moving. But I think we would all agree, wouldn't we, is that if you've got a stable home, it makes everything else so much easier. If you are looking for a job, but you're also sofa surfing or doing something like that, it must be particularly difficult. So this will help to build friendship amongst our youngsters, and a system of where they help each other to face these challenges, so that they can become independent, and they've got the home and they understand the difficulties. Then the challenge now, once we've got this up and running here, is to be able to expand it across other parts of the county. And going back to your original point about unaccompanied asylum seekers, part of something we have to do around children who are coming to people who are coming to us and saying they're a child, is there is a age assessment process. But what we have to do, and there was a recent court case about this, we have to absolutely treat that individual as a child, unless we are absolutely, completely, 100% certain that they are not, and that in itself creates challenges where you might have children seeking asylum who you might not think are children, and being placed with people who are definitely children. So that creates a challenge with that semi-supported accommodation, and how and where you are able to place these place these children, so that they're safeguarded, but also other children are safeguarded as well.
Thank you for that. I think it's an unexpected consequence sometimes, of echoing that point about Staffordshire extending a welcome through various hotels, and who would have thought that actually that would then, the consequence of that would have meant that we have that increase. Councillor Geller, I think you wanted to speak.
Thank you, Chairman. Sorry for my lateness. I think I explained to you why I was going to be late, so I won't go into that. My question really is about, whilst I agree that children in looked after children should be placed back with their families, how do we monitor that situation when they've been placed with their families, to make sure everything is okay and that child is safe? And my second question is about mental health, and how do you work with the Midland Partnership Foundation Trust, and I can say it like that without putting the university in, with children in care, because talking to them and finding that a lot of them are children in care. So how are you working with those to monitor their mental health? And I'd just like those answering, please. Thank you, Chairman.
So monitoring placement with families. So we understand it is children's social care will never close down a child unless we have handed it over safely to a community resource, or we have enough evidence to say the family can manage well themselves. So we will never just put a child back in a family who has been in care and then close that matter and not provide that support. So there are various tiers of support within the at different levels of children's services and then in the community. And it is to have that trusted adult who we are assured enough will oversee the arrangements within the community environment. So even if we were to take a child from care, go through the whole unification process with the family, which is around 40 weeks long, that reunification process, because it's not like one day you go home and you never come back. It is about a gradual increase of contact, so families get used to each other, problem solve wherever there are problems that are coming up, and then increase that time to overnight, weeks, and then fortnights, and then month, and then that's it. And within that time, there is always a plan of support, because community services like school will always be there having that oversight on that child who has to go to school every day, by the way. There will be health, if there are any additional health needs. There will be voluntary organizations in the community where the young person will be linked in for going into their afternoon clubs or evening clubs, which keeps an eye. And if there were to be any challenges, there is always family and friends around. If there aren't, there are community resources. But if there are family members around, we have a safety plan with the family to make sure that the needs of the child are met. So that's how we keep an eye, and we never close a case until we are assured that we have a safe enough plan. If situations, because life changes, things happen, and if there was to be another concern, they can always refer back, because that referral back into the local authority, that door is never shut. And we do have instances where we rehabilitate youngsters with family members, 3-4 months, great time, and after that, all bets are off and the child is back into care. And because we have known the history of that family, they don't have to suffer for a prolonged period of time, because we've known this family for a time. So we start from where we left off and then we work back again. So that's how we monitor and support families. Nobody's just left and forgotten. And in terms of mental health, how long have we got? Because I think everybody wants, when I'm speaking to partners, because when I was doing my system analysis, when I started in this role, and you always think it's social workers' job to exit children and get the right plan and all of that. And my view was always about, it's a partnership approach. It's a team around a child. It's a community around the family. It can't be done single-handedly. And that's when you start to see the depth and how entrenched everything is in this system, because it has functioned that way for such a long time. And mental health, the definition of mental health is quite technical, especially for children. So a child may not have no mental health needs on one day before their 18th birthday and full of mental health needs on their 18th birthday. So 24-hour changes a lot for the Mental Health Act regulations, and therefore support, because we have a very medical model. So what I see it as a personal success, and of course the success of our leadership team, because again, going back to our previous chief exec and all the work that he did, when even I was very new at the time, but he went with that and the challenge and the relationships that he formed, and now that consistency is following through within us. Natasha is a partnership AD, and she is also, we both work together, so is Tim, in keeping the messaging consistent, that it's not a mental health problem unless you diagnose that you won't provide support. These families have gone through a lot of neglect, a lot of trauma, which does something to the brain, which might not fit into your Mental Health Act, but that child and family needs mental well-being support. So we've got our MPFT and combined colleagues to come to this agreement that something is missing. I see it as a small step in the right direction. So we can acknowledge that we are not addressing trauma effectively, and in the mental health support for complex children, things are not working right. So we have moved a step away from saying, local authority, you deal with it. It's about, right, what do we need to do about it? I see it as a first step, and there is a long way to fill that gap, because in NHS, the providers for mental health support, for majority of, for tier 3 and onwards, that provision doesn't exist because it doesn't fit the medical model. Now, I hope I'm explaining the extent of gap that exists. If you have never seen something there, you've got to create something from vacuum. But at least we are acknowledging there is a vacuum. Let's do something about it. Because you can't have a voluntary organization who has got some people who are experienced with working with children and families with complex needs, but do not have the necessary qualifications, don't have the necessary tools to address the level of complexity and the volume of complexity that we are seeing. It's a huge issue.
Did you want to come back?
Yeah, just to say, actually, talking to the people at Midland Partnership, you know, my concern was that the number of looked after children that go there was quite high, and that concerned me. So, thank you.
So the number of children who go there, because there will be A&E admissions, because children are in that space where they have high needs, but the support is not there, and they're constantly turned back. So yes, and if you're talking about the volume, because the health assessments need to be done. So yes, that is a volume which we are working with, because there is a capacity issue at MPFT of addressing, but that's a statutory requirement and they have to provide. But I have to say I'm not raising it as a concern, because they have worked incredibly well with us. When the judgments changed and there was a higher need for medical support, they have provided. But I think because they started on a low base, they are having to work very hard to meet the statutory demand. The mental well-being is what I'm talking about, is things that fall outside the statutory area, but it is massive.
Thank you. Councillor Sutton.
Just on Anne's first point around that ongoing sort of, to make sure that it's safe and whether we monitor afterwards. Just as we have to convince the family court that it's the right thing to bring a child into care, we also have to convince the family court it's the right thing to do to discharge that child. So you know, it's not just our decision. You know, it's you know, it might be our thoughts to start with, and we might be able to provide the evidence. But you know, there is a statutory process, so there are plenty of checks and balances before that takes place. On the mental health front, as I said earlier, I was out visiting some of the district leads, and one of the district leads I was talking to was talking about their staff being able to work a little bit better with CAMS, and looking at why so many referrals were rejected, and it's not just because they don't meet the threshold. Well, it is. They don't meet the threshold on the form. So and a lot of them are from our staff. So they're doing some work on ensuring that our staff understand what will meet the threshold and what evidence that is needed to provide it, to be able to get that input from CAMS. You know, because the district lead was telling me, you know, that it is an issue, but they're working together in a way to try and ensure that you know, if a child does need that input, they are getting it. Something else Anisha was talking about, and I was talking to some colleagues from other areas, and this is at a higher level of need, and that's where that assessment about whether there's any input from mental health services for a child could be a little bit more based around the behaviours the child is exhibiting in the circumstances, and not just whether it was felt that there was an absolute medical mental health need. So there is work going on around that, and I think Nisha alluded to a little bit that we've been looking at that a little bit ourselves as well.
Thank you for that. Just a quick general question from me. You indicated right at the beginning that there is potentially, at whatever age it might be, this almost cliff edge milestone, isn't there? They get to a certain age and all of a sudden the realities of life kick in. It's something I have a personal experience of over many years with young people in care. And I know some of this is, potentially a social myth, but it has been my experience that very often, and we all want to do the right things for these children, of course, but they're very often prioritised in things like education, money, especially if they live in families where there are other children, then the benefits that they get is quite starkly different from that. And I'm not saying that's right or wrong or indifferent, but do you think that we add to that cliff edge problem by and I was interested to hear that the strategy about, children through a lifelong lens. Do we do them any favours by, to all intents and purposes, removing the challenges of normal life that maybe other young people have to go through and are prepared for that move into adulthood, when we have a cohort of people that, for all the right reasons, we don't allow to experience those challenges. And then when they leave the service, the impact is far greater than it would be on a child that's never been there. And I don't want to sound like I don't want young people to have that, but are we sometimes killing them with kindness? Shouldn't there be an expectation that when they go back into communities, and we were talking before about how do they reintegrate into either a particular community or the general community, are we helping them by the service that we provide? Should we not be providing something that resembles more of a normal upbringing, rather than they just seem to be lavished with a whole variety of various things? And it isn't all myth. So I do have some personal experience of it. And then you witness what happens to them when they leave and they've now got to try and find a flat somewhere, and all of the help goes. They're not prepared for budgeting. I was interested in, encouraged by what you said about trying to help them to become adults as they move forward. But I do wonder whether what we do really does prepare them for adult life and integration into communities once they've finished.
I think Councillor Eaglen will confer with us, with me around the corporate parenting panel, and these types of issues are discussed quite often in detail, and we get really, really good feedback now from young people through the Voice project about what works for them, what doesn't work for them, as well as through care levers and what has worked and what doesn't work. And I think there has to be an absolute balance. Certainly with children of that sort of school, still of school age, one of the big feedbacks we get is that they don't want to be different. When they're in class and somebody comes in and says, child, it's a visitor for child somebody, and they go out, the first thing they get when they come back is what was all that about? So they don't want to be different. So we have done work about, when they get a health assessment and somebody rocks up at the school to do it, how we do that in a better way, so they don't feel different. So there is a balance, isn't there? But one thing that we can't take away is that a child will become an adult, and at some stage they will be more on their own. And you will have heard me say this many times before, that would that be good enough? If it's not good enough for our own children, would it be good enough for a child in our care? And that's an adage I absolutely go by. And there aren't that many young people around who reach 18, who suddenly are just by themselves, and they've got no support networks, because most children will have families. The vast majority of young people at that age will probably still be living at home. So that's why I'm a particular big supporter of things like the house project. But I take on board completely, as a local authority and a society, you know, we can't continue looking after our care leavers forever and a day. And it's getting that right balance, isn't it? And this is why children that have been in foster care, who are now able to stay in that foster care, you know, if the foster carers are happy post 18, and provide some of that support, is if children are going to be, that is far better than residential care. If you're living in a family environment, you're more likely to be able to pick up those skills, aren't you? Hopefully they're required post 18 and as you go through life, than if you're living in residential home, particularly if that residential home, you know, is further afield. And I'll just give you a little example, and this is around children coming into care, and this is a sort of bit made up and a bit in reality. If you have a 17-year-old who comes to and presents themselves for whatever reason, or with the family, and you know the family says, I can't cope and I need to go into care, and maybe that child's on the edge of some criminality, starting to mix with the wrong people, you know, that working with that family then and trying to keep that child in that family, as opposed to finding a placement in a care home that might be 70 miles away, where in that care setting they might be, in my view, probably in the vast majority of cases, far more susceptible to exploitation than they would be at home. And that's a balance. You know, traditionally, going back, you know, that we might have said, yeah, come into care, but it's about looking at that and saying, where can we as a organisation better manage the risk? Well, if it's just down the road in the family home, it's probably more likely that we can manage that risk than if they're 70 miles away in a residential care home. You know, and I know that's perhaps an extreme example, and they're not all the cases are like that. But just going back to preparing children for adulthood, I think we generally are going absolutely in the right direction. The house project, I think, will be really, really good for that. But I absolutely take up on your point that children will become adults, and it's being able to prepare and do work to prepare children for adulthood with us, whether they're in foster care, whether in residential care, or whether, you know, they're in some semi-supported accommodation. And that's why we've been good. That's why we have looked, you know, for those 16 and 17-year-olds who are in residential care, to be able to step those down with support, so they can start to take a little bit more responsibility. But, you know, when you close your eyes and you think about it, doing that now at 16 and 17 is, you know, it's not what most children have. Most children will be at home. But, you know, most of us will be able to remember in this room at a time, if you go back, where the age for keeping children in care was 16, and it wasn't 18, and I think that is, you know, quite frightening. But that doesn't mean to say we can carry on increasing that age to 20, 21 or something like that. So I do take on board your point completely.
No, thank you for that. Again, just anecdotal evidence, but it is about, interesting when you said, you know, kids just want to be normal and want to be the same, but I can think of two that turn up at school in taxis every day. None of the other, and then, you know, are we therefore setting these young people aside for other people, you know, for their peers? Councillor Ed Geller, I think you wanted to make a comment.
Yeah, thank you, Chairman. Life experiences, you know, you learn a lot, don't you? Before I was a councillor, yeah, I've seen myself visiting my child in a residential unit a long way away, 200 miles away, and crying all the way back home because I wanted to take him out of there because I didn't feel personally that he was safe. But I couldn't, because I knew if I took him out of the system, I'd be on my own, and I didn't know where to go. So, you know, because County Council was involved at the time. But my question is, we talk about the cost of residential care and how much, I mean, yeah, it costs an awful lot, and it did at that time. Why aren't we building our own and running our own situation? We're a big enough county. You know, I mean, I realise that children, if they've got a problem in Tamworth with family and what have you, they need to move away from that area. I understand that. But why can't we? We're a big... somewhere in Newcastle, or if the problem's in Newcastle, you know, somewhere in town, we should be able probably to have our own residential units, if you like, instead of paying all these people that are just making a load of money at our expense. Thank you.
Councillor Son.
Well, we are, and the FIRS on the FIRS in Stafford has just come online. That's another one of our own residential, and there will be business cases coming to Cabinet to look at how we address this. It's not automatically cheaper to provide our own. What it is better. We have more control over it. We have control over those outcomes, and we are able to do the things that the Chairman spoke about in preparing children for adulthood, and have a system where when a child goes into one of our residential homes, we are working at how we get that child out of that residential home, maybe to foster care, back to the family or something like that. That's not in a provider's interest, is it, to do that? Because they want to keep the children in care. So we need, as I alluded to before, we need to get to a position where we, and I take all local authorities, are in control of that and not the providers in control. And that's a situation, and that will only come about, not just us in Staffordshire, where all local authorities start to do that a little bit. And when all local authorities are starting to be able to move down that line, then providers will not be able to have as much control over which children they take, which children they don't take, as they do at this moment in time, because we will be able to use our own provision. But that linked to our overall philosophy about working with children and the families, so that residential isn't always the necessary option. So we can do other things, either keep them at home, foster care, all sorts of other things will help to reduce that pressure on the market. Staffordshire is one of the only counties, areas in the country where within our boundary we have more than enough places for all our children in care. It's just that provider chooses where they come from. So whether they come from Greater Manchester, you know, or Norfolk, or what have you, you know. But if they were all those homes just had Staffordshire children, there would be ample provision within the county. We need to have more control over this, and this won't happen overnight. But we are, as I said, we are bringing business cases. We're working on that. The FIRS has opened up, and as a member of corporate parenting panel, you know, happy to arrange and sort out visits to go and have a look and see how things done, because we don't do the Reg 44 visits anymore at this moment in time. So we do need to look at how we can do that. I had a visit there just before it was able to take its own child. And with our residential care homes, post-COVID, we went through a time, I think, as Nisha mentioned earlier, some of these high-level children who had to be placed on their own were taking up 3 or 4 places in those homes. That is now not the case. So we are able to utilise those care homes for the purpose they were at. You remember the Stafford one called Short Breaks, and others we have dealing with children on the edge of care, and the idea of a child going there wasn't about a long-term, lifelong placement. It was about, you know, on that educare and being able to do something and maybe take the child out of the family environment while other people work with the family and issues, you know, to be able to try and rectify the situation. And now we're able to do that a little bit more than we were just post-COVID. You know, that can only be a good thing. And I don't know whether Nisha's got anything she would like to add.
Councillor McMahon, I think you indicated.
Mark answered my question. Thank you.
I'm not seeing any others. Just very quickly, I suppose, last question from me. The data on page 44, and I know that Nisha was saying, quite rightly so, that we want to get these numbers down, but we don't know what we don't know if something crops up. Would it be a reasonable measure, though, whether we get the numbers down or not? Would a reasonable measure be that Staffordshire adopts the position it should be on this graph, rather than more than the UK or, England, or more than its neighbours, or whatever the phrase is, statistical neighbours. I think you made the point that a comparison to the West Midlands probably isn't accurate. So would a test of where we are with all of this be if that line was somewhere in kilter with the bottom two lines? Yeah.
Mr. Chairman, I think you're spot on. And if you go back to 2015, 16, we were equidistant between those two lines, weren't we? You know, and I think that if we were equidistant again between those two lines, it would be great, as long as we are comparing apples with apples, and not apples with pears. And I don't keep wanting to go on about the UASC, but and I don't know with our statistical neighbours what element of UASC they have got in there, but it is a much better comparison than with our statistical than with the West Midlands region, albeit when you border quite a few of those, you know, you do need to still make that sort of comparison, don't you, with people who border you completely, who quite often face some of the, and I know some of those areas are very different to Staffordshire, you know, but actually sometimes, you know, facing exactly the same issues and problems. You know, places like Warwickshire, you know, for argument, and Worcestershire surround Greater Birmingham, Solihull in the same way as we do, but you know, in the north.
No, thank you for that. I don't think there's any more questions. I think similar to the previous presentation, it does feel like we're probably not where we want to be, but it feels like we're in a good position. It feels like we understand the issues really well, and hopefully we now have a plan to try to get that back. I would finish, if I could, Nisha, just by making the point that I found your very honest and very candid description of the data really refreshing. Sometimes I think we have to sit here and people try to put plasters on what clearly is a difficult set of data. You didn't do any of that, and I do find that quite refreshing. I also quite like this constant reference you made about Staffordshire being a problem-solving organisation, and actually we look to solve problems, not to sit back, and I think that is hugely encouraging. So thank you very much for all of that. Free to go. Thank you. That's great. For those that remain, item 6 is the work programme. Helen, would you be kind enough just to take us through?
Yes, thank you, Chairman. So we have 2 extra meetings that we've put in, both on the same date. The 24th of October, we've got an actual formal meeting at 12:30. I know that's a very odd time, but the reason for that is we'd already put in the informal meeting at 2, and I didn't really think that, you know, members would want to be in all day for 2 separate meetings. The 12:30 meeting as well is a one-item only pre-decision scrutiny item looking at the early years strategy before it goes to Cabinet, and it needed really to come in earlier than our our November meeting because of the time schedule for it going to Cabinet. So it's a 12:30, one item only meeting on the early years strategy, and then that will be followed at 2 p.m. With an informal meeting. So that's not a public meeting, not a published agenda, but it's an opportunity for you as members to meet with the Commissioner, Police, Fire and Crime Commissioner, to discuss. Initially, when we set it up, we were looking very much at the impact of the changes he's made following the repeal report, but also now you want to look very much at the impact or the potential implications for Staffordshire of the new project Right Care, Right Person, which is around whether or not they or how they attend incidences where there are mental health concerns from the individual. So that's something that we'll be looking at. Again, there are other things that you may want to raise, but those are the two main ones. We had a discussion previously amongst yourselves where, Chair, you asked for a number of pieces of information to be sent to members as background to those discussions. I've got those. I haven't sent them because I thought it would be neater to have this meeting today, but I will either tomorrow or beginning of next week, I'll forward those to you, so that will be background reading, very much ready for that. Our next meeting after that, and this is the one that was already in the calendar for you, is on the 23rd of November. And that's looking at placement sufficiency, which will be interesting after this morning's meeting. It's also looking at the work of the family improvement boards, and Mrs. Eagland, you raised that, didn't you, to include that. We're also looking at trading standards, which comes under the purview of this committee, and we haven't considered that for a while. And interestingly, we were also looking at vaping, and I noticed that's been making headlines recently as well. So you were ahead of the curve on that, I think, including it on your work programme.
I went to the AGM at the Midland Partnership yesterday afternoon, and I spoke to Neil Carr and that afterwards, and it's this police new way of working, and that is having a big impact on them. I just wanted to mention that. Thank you.
Also, to provide some context, you probably have already seen, but the Home Secretary now wants to, these things always go around in circles, don't they? You know, the objectives from a few years ago about looking after victims and victim care seems now to be getting watered down, and we seem to be going back to where we were about 15 years ago, where police forces are being held to account for policing. So it's about reducing crime, increasing detections. Most detections now, percentage-wise, are in single figures. Some of the really serious stuff like rape, barely 3% detection rate, and various other things. Money being provided for that. There is then a big push from government about police forces becoming more performance-driven, as they were previously, being held to account for reductions in crime, increases in detection rates and various other things. And I was told yesterday that Staffordshire has had a massive change around of all of its commanders and various other things. I anticipate that is in response to that. Holding people to account was the way that it was managed previously. So I think when we meet in October, that will be useful, because I think that then links into the Peel review. The Peel review criticised Staffordshire Police for its level of investigation and the way that it managed crime and offenders, all three of which are essential if you need to reduce crime and you need to move on. So I think it'll be quite an interesting debate. I would emphasise, I think we were going to meet prior to that, and we've got some information coming. I am keen that it is just an informal meeting. Unless other people disagree, I don't think we want a pre-arranged assault on them when they arrive. I think this is more of a discussion. Yeah. Yeah, go on. Yeah. Yeah, please do. Yeah.
And I also mention, actually, last night at the borough, we had two gentlemen come along and give us a rundown on hate crime, which was quite interesting, just, you know.
The far right across Europe and all of that, and it certainly is here. Some instances, are we being recorded still?
Yes.
I'll stop there then.
Can I just say, Chair?
Yeah.
Sorry, I should have said earlier that we have, you requested a pre-meeting before we meet with the Commissioner, and you should already have received a calendar invite for that on Monday the 16th of October at 3.
Lovely.
And that is really just about, so I'll send that background information out now, and it's just really about, as you say, it's an informal discussion with the Commissioner, but it's about you all agreeing the key areas you're going to raise with him.
That's right. Thank you. Thank you again for coming along, and I'll speak soon.